Walt Renner cleared out his desk in a cardboard box, while a 26-year-old contractor filmed a hype reel 3 feet away. Nobody helped him. Security stood at the end of the aisle and walked him to the door like a shoplifter. 26 years he'd given that company. He didn't argue. He just took the coffee mug and left the rest. That same morning, in the glass atrium, the VP said it out loud to 40 engineers. "We're paying for the future, not the fossils." 40 people applauded. Walt was one of 11 they cut before lunch. 3 weeks later, at 2 in the morning, every screen in that atrium turned red. The investor demo was in 9 hours, and buried deep in the dead core, in code none of them could read, was a single-line sign WR. If you believe respect is earned in silence, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this one move you, subscribe to the channel. And do me a small favor, comment what city you're watching from. I read every one of them, and I like knowing who's out there listening. Now let me tell you about Walt Renner. He was 58 years old, and he'd been at Meridian Financial for 26 of those years. That's a long time anywhere. In tech, it's a geological age. Most of the people he worked with had been in grade school when he wrote his first line of code for the company. He wasn't loud about it. That was the thing about Walt. He'd built something that mattered, and he almost never mentioned it. The younger engineers didn't even know. They walked past his cubicle every day and saw a graying man in a plain button-down shirt, and they thought, quietly, without malice, that he was just someone who hadn't left yet. But here's what none of them understood. Every product Meridian sold ran on top of a system called TallyCore. It was the transaction settlement engine. It was the thing that took every payment, every trade, every transfer, and made sure the numbers on both ends agreed down to the last cent. When you moved money through Meridian, TallyCore was the quiet machine underneath, checking the math, closing the books, keeping the whole thing honest. Walt wrote it. Not part of it. All of it. The original architecture, the failover logic, the settlement clock, every load-bearing piece. That was more than 20 years ago now. And in all that time, no slide in any board meeting had ever said his name. The system just worked. It worked so well, for so long, that people forgot it was a thing someone had made. They thought of it like plumbing, like gravity, something that had always been there. Walt didn't mind. That was maybe his blind spot, if you want to call it that. He believed competence should speak for itself. He believed if you did good work, quietly, over years, the work would stand up and be counted. He never learned to defend himself, because he never thought he'd have to. He had habits. Small ones. Every morning he'd come in early, before the lights were all on, and he'd stop at the big potted plant near the front of the engineering floor. It was a rubber plant, dark green, one of those hardy things that survive in offices. Somebody had bought it years ago and then stopped caring about it. Walt watered it. Nobody asked him to. He just did, because it was alive, and it was there, and he was passing by. And he kept a card in his shirt pocket, a laminated index card. On it, in his own small handwriting, sealed in plastic so the sweat and the years wouldn't smear it, were the emergency failover commands for TallyCore. The exact sequence. What to type, in what order, if the automated failover ever didn't catch. He'd laminated it himself at a copy shop maybe 15 years back. He carried it out of habit, the way an old carpenter keeps a pencil behind his ear. He never expected to need it. But it was there. He'd trained half the people who would eventually sign the paper that cut him. He didn't know that yet, that morning. But it was true. The manager who'd become VP one day, the leads, the mid-level people. A lot of them had sat next to Walt in their first weeks, learning how the machine actually worked, and he'd been patient with all of them. He never made anyone feel stupid. He remembered being new. One of the ones he was training, in those last months, was a young woman named Dana Osei. She was 29, sharp, careful, the kind of engineer who wanted to do the thing right more than she wanted to be seen doing it right. Walt liked her for that. He'd started showing her the corners of the system that weren't in any document, because there was no document. It was all in his head. He'd point at a block of code and say, "This looks strange, and it is strange, and here's why it has to be strange." And Dana would write it down. She was the only one writing it down. He didn't know it, but she was the reason the story doesn't end the way they wanted it to. The company was changing. You could feel it in the building. New people, younger, faster talking, with better haircuts, and worse patience. There was a word everyone had started using. Modernization. It meant a lot of things. And it meant one thing. It meant out with the old. At the top of it all was Trevor Vane. He was 34, and he was the CEO, and he had a story he liked to tell about himself. The story was that he'd come in and dragged a sleepy financial company into the future. He believed that story completely. He wore it like a good jacket. And to keep the story true, he needed the future to keep arriving, and he needed the past to keep leaving. Under him was Priya Nandakumar, the VP of Engineering. She was 41, and she was smart, genuinely smart. But she'd learned a dangerous thing on her way up. She'd learned to trust the org chart. She looked at boxes and lines and titles and salaries, and she made decisions from that map. What she didn't do, what she'd stopped doing, was walk the floor and ask who actually held the weight. She trusted the chart over the building. And leading the big modernization push was a young man named Marcus Ely. He was 27. He was, by every metric anyone measured, brilliant. People called him a 10x engineer, which is a thing people say about someone who ships fast and talks faster. Marcus had one goal that lived under all his other goals. He wanted to prove the old system was garbage. He wanted to rip out TallyCore and replace it with something new and clean that had his fingerprints on it. He mocked the old code constantly. He called it a museum. He called it COBOL cosplay, even though it wasn't COBOL, because the joke sounded better than the truth. Here's the thing about Marcus, though, and this matters. He had never read it. Not really. He'd skimmed it. He'd made faces at it in meetings, but he had never sat down and understood the thing he wanted to destroy. He mocked a house he'd never been inside. The layoff came on a Tuesday. Priya made the list. She sat in her office with a spreadsheet, and she sorted by cost and by age of role, and by whether the title had the word senior or legacy in it. Legacy, that was the word they used for the old systems, and somewhere along the way it became the word they used for the old people, too. 11 names. Walt's was one of them. On the spreadsheet, next to his name, was his salary. $140,000. Marcus, 3 lines down on a different sheet, cost the company $210,000. Nobody put those two numbers side by side. If they had, this would be a different story. They gathered everyone in the atrium first. That was Trevor's move. He liked the atrium. It was all glass, 3 stories of it, morning light pouring in, and it made everything he said feel like an announcement to the world instead of a memo to a room. 40 engineers stood there with their coffees. Trevor talked about the future. He always did. He talked about velocity and about being lean and about how great companies had the courage to let go of what no longer served them. And then he said the line, the one that 40 people heard, "We're paying for the future, not the fossils." And they clapped. Not all of them, but enough. Enough that the sound filled the glass room. Some of them clapped because they believed it. Some clapped because everyone else was. And it's a hard thing to stand still with your hands at your sides when a room is applauding. Walt stood near the back. He didn't clap. He just listened, and something in his face went quiet and closed, the way a store goes dark at the end of the day. 20 minutes later, they walked him out. It wasn't dramatic. That's what made it awful. A woman from HR he'd never met explained his severance in a calm voice. His badge stopped working before he even reached his desk. When he went to gather his things, there was already a contractor at the next station over, a kid maybe 26, filming a video on his phone. A hype reel, they called it. Behind-the-scenes energy for the launch. The kid was talking to his camera about the big migration, the new era, and Walt was in the background of the shot, folding a sweater into a cardboard box, and the kid did not lower the phone, did not step aside. Walt was scenery in someone else's launch video. Walt packed slowly. There wasn't much. A photo. The sweater. A few books nobody made anymore. And the mug. He left almost everything else. He wasn't sentimental about the stapler. On the shared screen at the end of the aisle, someone had TallyCore open. A code review. Half finished. Left up from the night before. Marcus was standing near it with two other young engineers, and he was doing a bit for them, reading the old code out loud in a funny voice, the way you'd read a bad poem. He landed on a comment. A line of green text, an author's note left in the code decades ago. It read, see runbook. Do not touch the settlement clock, WR. Marcus laughed. Who signs their code like a Christmas card, he said. WR. Look at this guy. See runbook, do not touch. Yeah, buddy, we're gonna touch everything. The others laughed too. They didn't know WR was standing 40 feet away with a box in his arms. Or if they knew, they didn't connect it. The initials were just a punchline. A ghost signature on a museum piece. Walt heard it. Of course he heard it. He didn't say anything. What would he have said? That he wrote that comment because he'd once watched the settlement clock drift by 4 milliseconds and nearly lose a day of transactions. And he'd spent a weekend of his life making sure it never happened again, and the comment was a message in a bottle to whoever came after. A small kindness from a man who wouldn't be there to explain it in person? You can't say all that with a box in your arms. So he said nothing. But on his way to the door, he stopped by Dana's desk. She was upset. You could see it. She'd known this was coming, and she still wasn't ready for it, because you're never ready to watch someone good get thrown out. She stood up when he reached her. Walt reached into his shirt pocket. He took out the laminated index card. He'd carried it every working day for 15 years, and now he held it out to her. Here, he said, in case the automated failover ever doesn't. Dana took it. She looked at the small handwriting, the sealed plastic, the careful list of commands. Walt, you'll know if you need it, he said, and if you never do, throw it out. No hard feelings. He almost smiled. Then he picked his box back up, and he walked past the plant, and he stopped, and he looked at it for a second like he was thinking about watering it one last time. And then he decided that wasn't his job anymore, and he kept walking, out through the glass doors, into the parking lot, into 3 weeks of quiet. Dana put the card in her wallet. She didn't know why. It just felt like the kind of thing you don't throw away. With Walt gone, the young team moved fast. That was the whole idea. Fast, the launch had a date now, and the date was sacred. In 9 weeks, Meridian was going to unveil the new platform, and it wasn't just a product launch. It was bigger than that. There was a client in play. A huge one. An anchor client, they called it. A name in the industry that other names watched. If this client signed, it meant a $180 million enterprise settlement contract. And it meant every competitor would look at Meridian differently. The contract was set to sign the same morning as the demo. Investors would be there. A business anchor from a financial network would be there. Trevor was going to stand in the atrium, in the glass and the light, and show the world a company with no dead weight. To hit the date, the team went through the old system like it was a house they were gutting. Rip out the legacy cruft, Marcus said. That was his phrase. Legacy cruft. Anything old, anything they didn't understand, anything that didn't fit the clean new picture, out it went. And one night, going through the scheduled jobs, they found something they didn't like. A nightly reconciliation job. It ran at 3 a.m, every morning, and what it did was quietly go through the day's settled transactions and recheck every one of them against a second set of books. If anything had drifted, even slightly, the job caught it and corrected it before the next day opened. Marcus looked at it and saw redundancy. The main settlement was already checking the math, wasn't it? Why run a whole second pass in the middle of the night? It was slow. It ate resources. It was, in his words, exactly the kind of belt and suspenders paranoia that old developers built because they didn't trust their own code. So they disabled it. It took about 4 seconds. A config change, a comment in the ticket that said removed redundant nightly recon, see modernization plan, and it was done. Marcus felt good about it. One less relic. He didn't know, because he'd never read the code, that the reconciliation job wasn't checking the settlement's work. It was catching a specific, rare drift in the settlement clock itself. A drift that only showed up under certain loads, a drift Walt had discovered 15 years earlier and quietly built a net for. The main engine couldn't catch it. That was the entire reason the second job existed. It wasn't redundant. It was the safety line, and they'd just cut it. And the audience watching this could see it happen, plain as day, while the people doing it saw nothing at all. The building didn't fall right away. That's not how these things go. The net was gone, but nobody had fallen yet. For days, the settlement clock did its quiet work and drifted a hair, and no job came at 3 in the morning to pull it back. And the hair became a little more than a hair. And still nothing broke. Everything looked fine. Everything looked, in fact, better than fine. Because now the system ran a few seconds faster at night, and Marcus had a slide that said so. Trevor loved that slide. Leaner, faster, no, dead weight. 3 weeks after they walked Walt out, at exactly 2 in the morning, the settlement clock drifted past the point of no return. It didn't beep politely. Systems this size don't fail gently. The drift crossed a threshold, and the settlement engine tried to close the day's books, and found that the two sides of the ledger no longer agreed, and it did what Walt had designed it to do in a true emergency. It stopped. It refused to settle anything on numbers it couldn't trust. It froze, hard, to protect the money. And then it cascaded, because everything ran on top of TallyCore. When TallyCore stopped, everything stopped. One by one, the products above it lost their footing. Payment processing, trade settlement, the client-facing dashboards. Each one threw its own error, and the errors climbed the stack, and in the atrium, on the big status wall that was usually a calm sea of green, the tiles began to turn red. First one, then a row, then the whole wall. The on-call engineer that night was a kid 2 years out of school. He saw the wall go red, and his stomach dropped through the floor. He started calling people. By 3, half the team was on a video bridge, dialing in from their apartments with the lights off, and their faces lit blue by their screens. By 4, they'd stopped pretending this was small. By 4:30, Marcus was in the building, and Priya was in the building, and someone had turned all the atrium lights on, and 40 desks sat empty under a wall that was completely, catastrophically red. The demo was in 9 hours. The client's technical team was landing at 8 in the morning to run their own tests before the show. That was standard for a contract this size. You don't sign $180 million on a slideshow. You bring your own engineers, and they poke the system with their own hands, and if it holds, you sign. They would be walking into the atrium in a few hours, and right now the atrium was a war room around a dead machine. Marcus took charge. Of course he did. This was his migration, his modernization, his moment, and part of him, the honest part he wouldn't look at, knew that. He stood in front of the red wall, and he said the words that confident young engineers say. "We've got this. Everybody breathe. Let's just figure out where it's failing and roll it back." That was the problem, though. They couldn't figure out where it was failing. They knew the settlement engine had stopped. They could see that. But when they went into the code to find why, they hit a wall of their own. TallyCore was 20 years of Walt Renner's mind, written in a style from another era, undocumented in any real way, dense and strange and load-bearing in 100 places you'd never guess. To Marcus and his team, it wasn't a code base. It was a foreign country with no map and no translator. They could read the individual words. They could not read the meaning. They'd spent months mocking this code without ever once being able to follow it. And now, at 4 in the morning, with the clock running, they needed to follow it. And they couldn't. They didn't even know where the failure lived. Marcus made a decision anyway. He was good at decisions, or good at making them, which isn't always the same thing. He said, let's roll back to last night's state and restart the engine clean. Undo the day, bring it back up, buy ourselves time. It sounded right. In a normal system, it might have been right. But TallyCore had frozen precisely because its books didn't agree. When Marcus forced the rollback and restarted the engine, he brought it back up onto the same disagreeing numbers, and the engine did the same thing it had done the first time, except now there was a rollback's worth of half-finished transactions tangled in with the drift. The wall didn't go green. It went a deeper red. New tiles failed that hadn't failed before. Marcus's confident fix had made it worse, publicly, in front of the whole exhausted team, and everybody in that room felt the temperature drop. That was the first real failure, not the outage itself. The outage was the machine doing its job. The failure was the expensive young team, the future they'd paid for, standing in front of the fossil's dead engine and making it worse because they couldn't read it. Priya came down onto the floor around 5. She'd been up in a conference room on the phone with a very calm, very unhappy man from the client's side, and she'd run out of calm things to say. She looked at the wall, and she looked at Marcus's face, and she understood that they were in real trouble. She started asking harder questions, not the panicked ones, the structural ones. What exactly changed? What did we touch? What's different now than it was a month ago, when this never happened? And a tired engineer, scrolling back through the change logs, found it. The nightly reconciliation job. Disabled, 3 weeks ago. Comment, removed redundant nightly recon. Priya stared at it. She wasn't a fool. She'd been an engineer before she was a VP, and something old in her woke up and said, that job was not redundant, was it? Redundant jobs don't kill you 3 weeks after you remove them. That's the signature of a safety net, not a waste. You don't feel the missing net until something falls. Who decided this was redundant? She asked the room. Nobody wanted to answer. Marcus did, because he was still Marcus. I did. It was running a second full pass every night for no reason, classic old system paranoia. And you read what it was actually checking? A silence. The honest answer was in the silence. He hadn't. Priya closed her eyes for a second. Then she said the thing that starts the turn. So we need to understand code that none of us wrote, and none of us understand in the next few hours, or we lose the contract. And in that moment, sitting on the floor against the wall with a cold cup of coffee, Dana Osei remembered the card. She almost didn't say anything. That's worth sitting with. She was the youngest person in that room with a real reputation to lose, and she'd watched what happened to people who were seen as attached to the old ways. She could have kept the card in her wallet and kept her head down and let the room fail on its own terms. That would have been the safe career move. But Dana wanted to do right more than she wanted to look right. That was the whole of her. So she took out her wallet, and she slid out the laminated index card that a man had handed her 3 weeks ago on his way out the door. And she looked at the small, careful handwriting, and she stood up. There's someone who can read it, she said. The room turned to her. Walt Renner. He wrote it. He wrote TallyCore. The whole thing. He wrote that reconciliation job, and I'd bet my life it wasn't redundant, because Walt didn't build redundant things. She held up the card so they could see it. He gave me this on the day you walked him out. It's the emergency failover sequence. In his handwriting. He said, in case the automated failover ever doesn't. She let that land. Well, it didn't. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Trevor, who had come down from his office and been standing at the edge of the room, said the thing that tells you everything about Trevor. He's gone, Trevor said. That's the point. We let him go. He said it like it settled the matter. Like the name Dana had just spoken was an embarrassment, a step backward, an admission that the future needed the fossils after all. And you could see, on his face, that the possibility Walt might be the answer was almost worse to him than the outage. Because if Walt was the answer, then the whole story Trevor told about himself had a hole in it. But something else was happening at the same time, on a screen at the side of the room that most of them didn't notice. There was a video bridge open to the board, emergency line, dialed at 4 in the morning because $180 million was on fire. Most of the board tiles were dark, people asleep, but one was lit. An old man's face, gray, lined, half in shadow in a home study somewhere. Harlan Voss. 66 years old. He'd co-founded Meridian before Trevor was old enough to drive, and now he was semi-retired, a board seat and a memory, the kind of founder people are polite to and don't really listen to anymore. Harlan had been half-dozing through the crisis call, letting the young people flail, the way you do when you've seen 100 fires. But when Dana said the name, his eyes opened. When she said Walt Renner and Tallycore and the reconciliation job, something moved in the old man's face. Recognition, he leaned toward his camera an inch. He didn't say anything yet. He just went very still and very awake, and he looked at the name on the screen the way you look at a face from your past walking through a crowd. Nobody in the atrium caught it. They were too busy with Trevor. Dana didn't back down. That's the other thing about her. Under the quiet, there was steel. With respect, she said to the CEO of her company, at 5 in the morning, with her job probably already gone in her head, "We don't have a better idea. We don't have any idea. We can't read the code. He can. I'm going to call him." Priya, who trusted the org chart over the building, looked at the dead wall, and for once let the building win. "Call him," she said. Trevor opened his mouth and then closed it. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound like a man protecting his ego over the company. Even he could feel that. Dana stepped away from the group, into the quiet by the glass, where the parking lot lights were still on, and the sky was just barely thinking about gray. She dialed the number off the back of the card, the personal cell Walt had written there years ago in case of emergencies exactly like this one. It was 5 in the morning. She expected voicemail. She expected to have to beg. He answered on the second ring. "Renner," he said. Calm, awake, like a man who'd been up early his whole life and saw no reason to stop now. "Walt, it's Dana. Dana Osei." Her voice cracked a little, and she hated it. "I'm sorry to call so early." The wall's red," Walt said. Not a question. She stopped. "How did you, because it's 3 weeks since you people started ripping things out, and 3 weeks is about how long the clock takes to drift once the recon job's gone." A pause. And in it, no anger. No "I told you so." Just a man reading a machine he knew better than he knew his own hands. "You disabled the nightly reconciliation, didn't you?" "Yes, yeah," a long breath on the line. "Okay, Dana, are you at a terminal?" "I can be." "Read me the last 4 lines on the settlement log," Walt said, out loud. "Just the last 4 lines, and don't touch anything until I hear them." And Dana, standing in the glass atrium, as the sky went gray over $180 million and a wall of red and a room full of the future that couldn't fix itself, sat down at a borrowed laptop, pulled up the settlement log, and began in a steady voice to read a dead man's machine back to the only man alive who could hear what it was saying. Behind her, on the board line, Harlan Voss watched the name on his screen and said nothing. Yet, and the clock over the atrium doors, the one counting down to the demo, the one nobody could stop, read 8 hours and 41 minutes. She read them slowly. 4 lines, numbers and timestamps, and a status flag that meant nothing to her and everything to him. Walt was quiet for a moment. She could hear something on his end, a spoon against ceramic, a chair. "Okay," he said. Don't touch the failover. Not yet. The automated one already tried and failed, and if you trip it again manually, it'll fight me while I'm working. Just leave it red. Can you do that? Leaving it red feels insane, Walt. I know it does. Red's honest right now. Red's the machine, telling you the truth. A pause. I'm going to get in my car. She almost dropped the phone. You don't have to come in. I can type. Just tell me what to type. I know you can. But there's a thing in there you can't see from a terminal, and I'd rather look at it with my own eyes than guess. A breath. Besides, I want my mug back where it belongs. And he hung up. Dana sat with the borrowed laptop warm on her knees and did the hardest thing anybody asked her to do that night. She did nothing. She watched the wall stay red, and she kept her hands in her lap. Behind her, Harlan Voss was still on the board line, a small square face on a screen at the far end of the atrium, and he had not said a word in 20 minutes. But he was leaning in now, closer to his camera, reading something. And the name he was reading was one he had not heard spoken aloud in a very long time. Marcus was still up on the mezzanine, hunched over 3 monitors, and he had not slept, and it showed. His hair was flat on one side. His confidence had a hole in it that he kept trying to talk over. "We don't need him," Marcus said. "To nobody. To everybody. I've got the rollback staged. If I re-image the settlement node and push it clean, we skip the drift entirely." "Marcus," Priya said. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the rubber plant, shoes off, 41 years old and looking 60. "The rollback already made it worse once, because I hadn't isolated the clock. Now I have." "You haven't isolated anything. You've got a theory." He pushed the button anyway. For 4 milliseconds, the settlement engine tried to accept his clean image and reconcile it against a ledger that had drifted 3 weeks past where his image thought the world was. And then it did the only thing a careful machine can do when the past and the present disagree by that much. It stopped. Harder than before. A second wall of red bloomed under the first, and a low tone started somewhere in the building's alert system, a soft, patient chime that meant transactions were now queuing with nowhere to land. Marcus stared at it. "That's not." He stopped. He tried again. "That shouldn't do that." "It did that," Priya said, "because you told a machine that remembers everything to forget 3 weeks and trust you instead." She put her head back against the plant. "It doesn't trust you, Marcus. It doesn't know you. It's never met you." Nobody laughed. That was the worst part. 3 weeks ago, that line would have gotten a laugh. Now it just sat there in the cold atrium air. True, the doors at the far end opened at 6:40, and Walt Renner walked in. He did not look like a rescue. That was the thing Dana would remember. He looked like a man who'd stopped for gas. Gray windbreaker. A thermos under one arm. And in his right hand, the coffee mug. The same chipped white mug he'd carried out of this building 3 weeks ago in a cardboard box, refilled now, steam coming off the top of it in the cold morning air of the atrium. He didn't announce himself. He didn't look at the mezzanine where Marcus had gone very still. He looked at the rubber plant. "Somebody's been watering it," he said. "Dana has," Priya said quietly. Walt nodded. "Like that settled something." "Good." He set the mug down on an empty desk near the front, a hot desk, unassigned, the kind the young hires used and abandoned. And he pulled out the chair, and he sat, and he opened the borrowed laptop Dana slid in front of him, without being asked. And the whole atrium, 40 engineers, who had been screaming at each other for 4 hours, went quiet to watch a 58-year-old man they had walked out the door, read a wall of red like it was a letter from an old friend. He didn't rush. He scrolled. His lips moved a little, not talking, just reading. He opened the settlement log. He opened a second window. He typed one command, waited, read the answer, and grunted. 90 seconds. That was all it took him to find it. "There," he said, and turned the laptop a few degrees so Dana could see, though nobody else could. "See that?" The clock. Your recon job used to walk this every night at 3 a.m. and nudge it back into true. 4 milliseconds of drift a day. Nothing, you'd never feel it. But you turned the job off 19 days ago, and 4 milliseconds a day for 19 days is. He didn't finish the arithmetic out loud. He just tapped the number on the screen. The settlement clock and the ledger clock stopped agreeing. And when they disagree by more than the reconciliation window, the engine does exactly what I built it to do. It refuses to guess. It stops. Marcus had come down off the mezzanine. He was standing 10 feet back, close enough to hear, not close enough to be part of it. So we turned the recon job back on, he said. That's it? That's the fix? Walt didn't look up. No. If you turn it back on now, it'll try to close 19 days of drift in one pass, and it'll lock every settlement in the queue trying to do it, and you'll be down through lunch. He kept typing. You have to walk it in. Small steps. Let it close the gap over about 40 minutes instead of all at once. There's a flag for that. There's a run book for that. A pause, and now, for the first time, something dry crept into his voice. There's a comment on it, actually, if anybody had read it. He typed one more line, and then he did the thing that Dana would tell people about for the rest of her career, though he said it so flat and so quiet that half the room missed it. He said, you didn't break the old system. He hit enter. You just stopped listening to it. The clock over the atrium doors read 2 hours and 9 minutes. For a while after that, nobody talked much. Walt worked. He'd type, and wait, and read, and type again. And every few minutes a small piece of the wall would go from red to amber, and once to green, and a soft cheer would try to start, and then die. Because everybody was too tired and too raw to celebrate anything yet. Marcus couldn't sit with it. Dana watched him try. He'd stand, and pace, and come back. And finally he pulled a chair up near the front desk, not next to Walt, but near, and he opened his own laptop and started building something. I can help, Marcus said. I'll stage a parallel path. Migrate the queue off the legacy engine onto the new settlement service while you stabilize the old one. Then even if yours holds, we've got a modern path for the demo. Best of both. Walt didn't tell him no. That was the thing. He could have. He just said, sure, show me when it passes on live data. So Marcus built. And for 40 minutes the two of them worked 10 feet apart, the young man and the old one. And it was the closest thing to a fair fight the morning had. Marcus was fast. Nobody in that building was faster. His fingers flew. His new settlement service was elegant, genuinely elegant, all clean modern code with none of the crust of the old core. And at 7:50, with the client's technical team landing at the airport, Marcus pushed his parallel path onto live transaction data to prove it could carry the load. It handled the first 1,000 transactions beautifully. The second 1,000. Marcus started to smile. And then the morning volume ramped. Real money, real settlements. The two-phase commit firing across accounts that had to either both move or neither move, and Marcus's beautiful modern service hit a settlement that required it to hold 2 ledgers in lockstep for the length of the reconciliation window, and it didn't know how. Because nobody had ever taught it that the window even existed. Because the window lived in a nightly job written more than 20 years ago by a man they'd walk to the door. His service dropped the commit. Half a transaction moved. $140,000 left one account and did not arrive in the other, and sat, for 4 milliseconds, nowhere at all. Walt caught it before it could cascade. His hands were already moving. He rolled the half transaction back, closed the gap, and folded that account cleanly back into his own stabilizing engine, and it was done so fast and so quietly that most of the room never knew there'd been a knife at their throat for the length of a blink. Marcus knew. Marcus watched the whole thing happen on his own screen. Watched the old engine reach over and catch the money his new one had dropped, and he went the color of the wall behind him before it turned green. How? Marcus said. His voice had nothing left in it. How did it even— I built that clean. I built that right. How does yours know to do that and mine doesn't? Walt finally looked at him. Not unkindly. That was what undid Marcus. Later, when he thought about it. There was no cruelty in the old man's face at all. Because I got it wrong first, Walt said. About 40 times. 15 years back. 20 years back. Every one of those 40 times cost somebody real money at 3 in the morning, and every one of them taught the code a thing it couldn't have known any other way. He turned back to his screen. You can't write that clean. Clean means it hasn't been hurt yet. This thing's been hurt for 26 years. That's not cruft. That's the scar tissue that's holding your launch up. Somewhere behind them, someone had pulled up a screen nobody had looked at in years. Dana heard the small sound Priya made and turned. Priya had the original design document open. The one from the very beginning of the company, before the glass building, before Trevor, before any of them. A scanned PDF, 40 pages, the architecture of the entire settlement engine laid out by hand. On the first page, under Architect of Record, was a name. W. Renner, Priya scrolled. The Git history behind the core was one long spine of the same 3 letters. Commit after commit after commit, year after year, WR, WR, WR. A man's whole working life written into the load-bearing wall of a company that had put him in a cardboard box for $140,000 a year. And Marcus, standing there, finally read the comment, the one he'd laughed at on the shared screen 3 weeks ago, the one he'd called a Christmas card. WR. See runbook, don't touch the settlement clock. It'll drift 4mm/day without recon. 19 days is the ceiling. After that it stops. It's supposed to stop. Don't force it. Walk it back in. You'll thank me at 2 a.m. Someday Marcus read it twice. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. The man had left him a note, 20 years early, telling him exactly how he was going to fail. And Marcus had turned it off and mocked the signature. The clock over the doors read 1 hour and 11 minutes when the client's technical team came through the atrium doors. Early, the way important people are, always early to the thing they're worried about. 3 of them. And leading them, an older man in a plain jacket with reading glasses pushed up on his head. The client's chief architect. The veteran they'd sent to decide whether Meridian was a company worth $180 million. Trevor Vane materialized from wherever CEOs go during disasters, suit crisp, smile bolted on, and intercepted them at the door. Gentlemen, Trevor said. Welcome. I want to be transparent with you. We had an overnight event, and I'm proud to say the team handled it. Resilience, that's what you're buying with Meridian. A company with no dead weight. He gestured back toward the floor, toward the wall going green, without quite looking at who was making it happen. We brought in a specialist consultant to advise, but the fix is all team. Walt didn't stop typing. He didn't even look up. But Dana saw his jaw move, once, and the client's veteran architect was not looking at Trevor at all. He was looking past him, at the front desk, at the gray-haired man, and the chip mug, and the wall of green spreading out from wherever that man's hands were. He'd been doing this 30 years. He knew what the center of a save looked like. He walked past Trevor's outstretched hand like it wasn't there, and crossed the floor to Walt's desk. That was the moment the doors opened again, and Harlan Voss walked in. 66 years old, co-founder, the V in half the company's paperwork. He almost never came in anymore. He'd been a face on a board-line screen at the far end of the atrium for 4 hours, and now he was here in person. Coat still on, and the room parted for him the way it doesn't for CEOs, only for the people who built the thing the CEO runs. Harlan didn't go to Trevor. He went to the front desk, too. He stopped a few feet from Walt, and he looked at him for a long moment, and something moved across his face that Dana couldn't name until later. Recognition, and under it shame. Walt Renner, Harlan said. Walt looked up. Harlan, they told me a consultant fixed it. Somebody's been telling you a lot of things, Walt said, and went back to his screen. Harlan Voss turned around. He turned to face the whole atrium, the 40 engineers, the client's team, Trevor with his smile finally starting to crack at one corner, Priya on the floor by the plant, Marcus standing in the wreckage of his own clean code. And he said it plainly, in the flat voice of a man too old to bother with anything but the truth. That man, Harlan said, pointing at Walt without looking at him, architected everything you are standing on. His name is on the design document. His name is on the core. His initials are in the comment your best engineer laughed at 3 weeks ago. He let that sit. He has had a name on this company you've all been walking past for 3 weeks. And this morning, it turns out, it was the only name that mattered. The client's veteran architect had been reading over Walt's shoulder the whole time. Now he straightened up. He looked at the failover sequence on the screen. The reconciliation walk-in, the two-phase commit holding steady under full morning load. And he made a small sound of professional pleasure, the sound a craftsman makes when he sees good work. "This is yours?" he asked Walt. "The settlement design, the window handling. This is all yours?" "It's old," Walt said. "It's the cleanest settlement architecture I've seen in 20 years, the man said. "I mean that. I've reviewed 40 of these. This is the one I'd want holding my money at 2 in the morning. He put his hand out. "It'd be an honor." And Walt Renner, 58 years old, 3 weeks unemployed, stood up and shook the hand of the man who held $180 million, and he said one word. "Thanks." The clock over the doors read 51 minutes. They ran the demo at 9 on the dot, and it ran green. All of it. Every screen in the atrium that had been read at 2 in the morning was green at 9. And the settlements flowed, and the two-phase commits held, and the reconciliation walked its little 4-millisecond walk in the background exactly the way it had for 26 years, patient and unthanked. The investors watched from a glass conference room and nodded at numbers that meant the thing worked. The client's team watched the load ramp to full production volume and not so much as flicker. At 9:40, the client signed $180 million. And when Trevor moved to take the pen for the photo, the client's veteran architect said, mildly, that he'd like the engineer who built the settlement core in the picture too, if that was all right. And it was not all right. You could see it wasn't all right, but there was nothing Trevor could do but smile and wave Walt over. Walt didn't come. He was busy. He waved the mug at them from the front desk, a small, tired gesture, and went back to watching the wall stay green. Trevor found his footing again by 10, the way his kind always does. He gathered the room. He stood in front of the green wall in the glass atrium, the same spot, Dana realized, the exact same spot where 3 weeks ago he'd told 40 applauding engineers that Meridian was paying for the future, not the fossils. He spread his hands. "What a night," Trevor said. "What a team." This is what resilience looks like. This is a company that meets a crisis and comes out stronger. I could not be prouder of thee, he called Walt. It was Dana. She didn't stand up on a chair. She didn't raise her voice. She was so tired she could barely hold her head up. But she said it into the middle of Trevor's sentence, clear enough to carry, and the room turned. "I'm sorry," Trevor said. "What?" "You keep saying the team," Dana said. "There is no team fix. At 2 in the morning, every person you're proud of was standing in this room watching it burn, and none of us, Trevor, could read the code well enough to find the fault. I called Walt. I called him at 5 a.m. off a card he gave me the day you walked him out. Because he was the only human being alive who could read his own machine. That's not resilience. That's one man you fired coming back to save a launch none of us could." She looked around the room, at 40 faces, at Marcus, at Priya. "I'm not going to stand here and watch us take his name off it a second time." Nobody clapped. That would have been wrong, and everybody knew it. The room just held very still, and in the stillness Trevor Vane had no line, no pivot, nothing bolted on, and the silence stretched out long enough to become a verdict. That was his sentence. No shouting. Just 40 people looking at him and knowing, all at once, exactly what he'd done. Priya got up off the floor by the rubber plant. She put her shoes back on. She walked over to the desk where she'd left the layoff list 3 weeks ago, the printed spreadsheet with 11 names on it, and she picked it up, and she looked at it a long time. 11 people they'd cut before lunch. Legacy staff. Dead weight. She'd trusted the org chart. She'd trusted the number by each name. 140,000, 130, 160, and she had not once, not one single time, asked what any of those people were actually holding up. She folded the list in half and put it in her pocket. She didn't throw it away. Dana noticed that. She kept it. Trevor came to Walt at 11, when most of the floor had cleared, when the client was gone and the investors were gone and there was nobody left to perform for. He pulled a chair up and he sat down across from the man he'd fired, and he tried one last time to be the smartest person in the room. "Walt," Trevor said, "I want to make this right. Come back. Full salary. More than before. I'll beat the old number. I'll double the look. We'll call you distinguished engineer. We'll put you on the org chart wherever you want. You name it. Come back and be part of the team." Walt turned the mug in a slow circle on the desk. He looked at Trevor for a moment, and there was no anger in it, and that was somehow worse than anger. "No," Walt said. "Walt, not on your terms." He said it gently. "You want to hire the thing you cut because it turned out to be load-bearing. I understand that. But you'd be hiring it the same way you fired it, as a number, as dead weight that turned out not to be dead. And in 2 years, when the launch is old news and the wall's been green so long you forget it was ever red, you'll do it again. To me? Or to somebody like me?" He shook his head. "I'm too old to get walked out twice." Trevor didn't have anything for that. He left. And that was the last real conversation the two of them ever had, though neither of them knew it in the moment. Harlan Voss stayed. He sat with Walt after Trevor was gone, and the two old men drank coffee out of the thermos in the empty atrium, and Dana, cleaning up nearby, heard Harlan say quietly to the board line he'd left open on his laptop the whole time. "So the other founders could hear it, we cut the wrong salary. I want that in the minutes. We saved $140,000 in March, and we nearly lost $180 million in July. And the difference between those two numbers is one man's name that nobody thought was worth reading." A pause. "I'd like to fix that. If he'll let us." He would. But only one way. Walt came back to Meridian 6 weeks later. Not as a consultant, and not on Trevor's org chart, and not for double the old number. He came back as principal architect, on a contract he wrote himself, with one job written into the top of it in plain language: document the core, and teach the people who have to live on top of it. Rebuild the runbooks. Write down 26 years of scar tissue so that when he was finally actually gone, the next 2 in the morning didn't take the whole company down with it. And he had one condition, which he did not negotiate. Dana Osei would lead the migration alongside him. The junior engineer. The one who kept the card. The board approved it in a sentence. Marcus came to him on the first day back. Dana watched it happen from across the floor and pretended not to. Marcus, 27, the 10 times engineer, the one who'd called it COBOL cosplay, stood in front of the desk and couldn't find the beginning of the sentence for a while. "I never read it," Marcus finally said. "The core. Not once. I mocked it for 3 weeks straight, and I never opened a single file. I assumed old meant bad. I assumed I was smarter than a thing I'd never looked at." He swallowed. "I don't want to do that again. Could you teach me to read it?" Walt looked at him a long moment. And then he reached into his shirt pocket, out of the old habit he'd never lost, and he took out a fresh laminated index card. Emergency failover commands, printed clean, the settlement clock warning right there at the top where nobody could miss it. He held it out, Start with this, Walt said. Keep it in your wallet. Not because the automated failover doesn't work. A small dry line at the corner of his mouth. Because someday it won't. And you'll want to have listened. Marcus took the card like it was made of glass. 6 months later, the atrium wall was green so often that people forgot to look at it, which is the highest thing you can say about a settlement engine, that it had gone back to being invisible. On the wall by the doors, where the countdown clock used to hang, someone had put up a small brass plate, just a line of names, the people who'd built the core, all the way back to the beginning. W. Renner was first, because he was first, and no slide deck was ever going to change the order again. Walt came in most mornings around 8. He'd stop at the rubber plant at the front of the engineering floor and check the soil with 2 fingers and water it if it needed it. Though usually it didn't, because Dana still did it too. And the two of them had a running quiet argument about who was overwatering the thing. He carried the same chipped white mug. He'd built it a little permanent home on the corner of the good desk they finally gave him, the one by the window, and on days he wasn't in, nobody touched it. Trevor Vane was still the CEO, for a while. The reinvention story he'd been telling, the young company with no dead weight, the future paying for itself, got quietly harder to tell after a night when the future couldn't read its own code, and a fossil saved the launch. The slides about it disappeared off the company drive one at a time. Nobody announced it. They just stopped being there. Priya still had the layoff list. She'd told Dana once, near the end of a long day, that she kept it in her desk drawer on purpose, that before she signed anything now, before she cut a single name, she made herself go and read the actual code the person touched. Not the org chart, not the salary. The load. What are they holding up? She said she'd have signed a very different list in March if she'd done that first. She said it like a confession, and Dana let her. And Marcus. Marcus turned out to be, once he was humbled, exactly as good as he'd always thought he was, just pointed the right direction. He read the core end to end, all 26 years of it, and somewhere in the 3rd month he stopped apologizing and started building. And the documentation that came out of him and Walt together was the best thing Meridian ever shipped, because it had the young man's clarity and the old man's scars in the same pages. He still carried the index card in his wallet. Dana had seen it. Corner going soft from being sat on. The newest hands, it turns out, aren't always the ones holding the building up. Sometimes the building is standing on a man you put in a cardboard box, and you don't find out until 2 in the morning, with the wall gone red and the clock running down. When you finally have to call the one number nobody thought to keep, except one junior engineer who kept a card, because somebody had once been kind enough to give her one. Walt never did tell them he'd known it would happen. He didn't have to. The comment said it for him, 20 years early, right there in the code they'd mocked. You'll thank me at 2 a.m. Someday, they did. If you've ever been the quiet one in the room who held the whole thing up while somebody else took the photo, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city. I read every one.